And we talked about this in our pregame yesterday, that there were 3 decks, Simic Flash, Simic Ramp, and Jund Sacrifice. The majority of the field picked Simic Ramp, and we were concerned that that was just the wrong pick for the tournament.
Right. We saw in the first match of this round, just there's so much reach from the Jund Sacrifice deck that turtling up behind all of these blockers is not actually going to be an effective long-term strategy against something like Jund Sacrifice.
And let's look at the first 2 matches we saw. We saw Simic Ramp lose to Jund Sacrifice. We saw Simic Ramp lose to Simic Flash. Can Collins pick up a win with this deck? And that's going to be the question.
Right. And, we see this early copy of Trail of Crumbs come down from Jund Sacrifice. This means that Edgar is just not going to have that much trouble finding his key pieces.
Leafkin Druid from Collins. He is on the play here for the 3rd game.
So Edgar has Forest, Stomping Ground. None of those lands are black. That's a problem.
Okay. Yeah, that is the main color of the deck.
It's an awkward spot where you need all these untapped green sources in order to support your mana creature in Gilded Goose. But you also need to cast Murderous Rider, a Cauldron Familiar, Mayhem Devil, all these things.
And Collins is going to start to get out ahead here with a turn 4 Cavalier of Thorns.
And if Edgar can't find a way to actually put anything in front of this, it definitely runs the risk of just taking this game away.
The ramp deck is very consistent, and if Edgar stumbles, he will fall too far behind here.
Exactly. That's one of the draws to the deck itself, is just the fact that it doesn't feel like it runs out of threats once it starts getting them.
And you see kind of the disaster here for Edgar. His turn 3 had to be sacrifice the food for 3 life, activate Trail of Crumbs. Now, fortunately, he did find a black mana source. But that came at the cost of an entire turn.
Bright side, the game's not lost at this point. This deck is very good at creating something like Cauldron Familiar plus Witch's Oven to just make it very hard to effectively attack the deck in combat.
So we see Cauldron Familiar, we see Gilded Goose, we see Witch's Oven. Okay, maybe everything's fine now. We saw Edgar some expertise with this deck already. He knocked Joe Lissette out of the tournament yesterday in Standard.
And here we even see a spot where he's going to get to draw an additional card just by looping this cat with the Witch's Oven and this Trail of Crumbs on the battlefield.
Looking over to Collins' hand. Some lands, Aether Gust, and Quasi-Duplicate. Swings with Cavalier. And it's a free block and loop for Edgar. So blocks with the cat, puts it into the oven. He has that 1 mana ready for when he wants to return Cauldron Familiar. He can activate Trail of Crumbs. And I do like what Collins' play is going to be here. It looks like he can just quasi-duplicate his own Cavalier.
And if he hits a blue source off the token, he can do it again.
That's going to be the play.
Why would you make 1 5/6 when you can have 3 5/6s?
I do like that kind of play.
It's just good math, really. 1 bigger than 3.
So, gets a land here. You mentioned we're looking for a blue mana source. Does he find it? Castle Vantris. Yeah, that works.
Like the clever use of the Benny Smith token there.
It's a copy token.
It is. There's part of me where I thought, why don't they use the Shapeshifter token? It would make sense, but this is even better.
Yeah, you got next leveled.
Oh, look, I'm not upset. This is just good TV.
And I like this 2 copies. Yeah, he has another Castle Vantris, looks like, to pitch to the Quasi-Duplicate if he wants. The hard part is that if he makes another 5/6, he does take down Aether Gust.
Unless the 5/6 hits a blue source.
Oh, maybe he gets everything.
Good
That's
read.
Nice. So, going to jumpstart the Quasi-Duplicate, discarding a basic forest to it. Another 5/6. This will put pressure on Edgar.
Yeah, this is the spot where cat is not going to completely lock up the battlefield anymore. Edgar really needs to find another oven, another cat, something to deal with what's on the battlefield.
And one of the innovations we've seen from Collins here, those quasi-duplicates, you see he actually passed over one of them with this Cavalier, meaning he can jump start off it. And did have the Castle Vantress in hand, so it looks like he'll be able to leave up Aether Gust. Top 2 cards from Edgar. Off the Trail of Crumbs finds a Fabled Passage. He started to get the deck working, but he is under some significant pressure.
Right, he's actually pretty behind in this spot. Having to take off that third turn, it's looking like it might cost him here.
Yeah, that third turn cost him the potential to have something like Mayhem Devil already on the battlefield.
Right, just effectively gaining 3 life when drawing cards is kind of a given whenever you have Trail of Crumbs. I know that might sound a little off, but you have so many things that sacrifice food between Cat and Oven and Corvold and so on that running out of cards is rarely the squeeze. Having to commit an entire turn to that feels much more like committing an entire turn to gaining 3 life, which just isn't that much on this sort of battlefield.
Go back to Collins. He does have that Aether Gust in hand. I like that it gives him insurance against some of Edgar's larger catch-up cards, things like Corvold.
Corvold and Casualties of War both are just not things that you really want to find at this point.
So a swing for 10 from Collins. Edgar, block, sacrifice. Two mana, going to be Noxious Grasp on one of the tokens. Collins might be fine with that.
It's nice because he can't exile it and get a card back because the card ceases to exist.
Yeah, it says you may exile it, but then it says if you do. So Edgar going for one of the tokens there. The death trigger on Cavalier does not work on token copies. See Collins still largely okay with that. Thanks to the quasi-duplicate he milled over, he should be able to replace that Cavalier, assuming he wants to play it into open mana.
Right. And at this point, you kind of have to assume there's a pretty high chance that Edgar doesn't have a removal spell if he didn't pull the trigger on it in combat.
Well, it's interesting, right? Edgar does see the quasi-duplicate in the graveyard, so maybe he holds.
Sure, and it feels like in this spot, Edgar's just trying to weigh if cards or life total is the squeeze at this point. And if he feels like he's just falling too far behind on life total while he's trying to build his battlefield, then he's kind of just priced into pulling the trigger in combat.
All right, so we see the quasi-duplicate jumpstart out of the graveyard on the actual Cavalier. Collins gonna go call Edgar's bluff, see whether he actually has the removal spell, or will Collins get to replace the Cavalier?
The classic show me line.
Looks like Edgar might have it. He's goes for that swamp. He does. Now, because Collins correctly targeted the real Cavalier, he will get the death trigger here. You see some Hydroid Crises in the graveyard. It's not terrible for Collins.
No, not at all.
But second Noxious Grasp is going to be the play. Cavalier's down. The quasi-duplicate will be countered on resolution. Collins exiles it. Does he want to crisis? He does. 8 mana already in play for it.
That is several mana. We're talking multiple mana here.
Actually make that 10 after the land drop. And now Leafkin Druid. Edgar continues to build up, though. Activates Trail of Crumbs, gets back Cauldron Familiar, finds a second Witch's Oven. Maybe
Okay.
this is good enough.
Right, and this is a spot where Edgar's kind of been able to stabilize a little bit. And now, if he can just find the moving pieces he needs, this could be enough to just give him that breathing room he needs.
Attacks with Cauldron Familiar. It's a pretty free attack. Collins will block.
Meow.
And we see Mayhem Devil from Edgar. That should get the Aether Gust. But he's going to start with Witch's Oven. And now Mayhem Devil. Does that get gusted? Can Collins let that resolve? Unclear.
Oof, this is a spot that is real ugly. Since you don't actually have that much pressure on the battlefield, if you Aether Gust this, you're pretty soft to a Corvold, but you're going to lose your Leafkin Druid if you don't pull the trigger.
Right, and he decides he has to. Aether Gust targeting the Mayhem Devil. That'll go back on top of the deck, I assume. In response, with Gust on the stack, Oven, Cauldron Familiar, back into play, drain for 1.
And this is just Edgar saying, I know I want to spend my next draw step on Mayhem Devil, so let's go ahead and use my selection now. It also helps him influence if he wants to put that card on the top or the bottom. So I see Castle Garenbrig hiding out down there. Between that and Leafkin Druid, are we going to see a 10-10 crisis?
That's what it looks like. That is a good rebuild here for Collins.
Oh, there are 2 Castle Garenbrigs.
Okay. Each one adding 1. So together that should get him up to 12 mana, I believe.
Oh, he might be missing the blue on the back of them since they can't activate. You can't sync the 4 mana from a Castle Garenbrig into another Castle Garenbrig.
Okay, you can only use
need a
one.
blue.
Right.
On one hand, it's an awkward situation. On the other, it's also a bit of an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah, you're right. He actually can't use both. So Garen Briggs for 6 makes that 10, 11. This looks to be a Crisis for 9. Collins deciding whether it wants to be for 9 or 8, whether that matters. He will make a Crisis for 8, drawing himself 4 cards. Gets to leave up that breeding pool.
Right, and the idea here is he's hoping to spike a land and an Aether Gust. That way he can answer this Mayhem Devil that he knows is coming off the top of Edgar's library.
Yeah, Devil plus Cat plus 2 ovens. It's going to add up real quick, as we've seen in these other games.
Right, 16 sounds like a high life total, but we both know, and we saw earlier, less than an hour ago, it just really isn't.
I mean, right when Edgar is still in somewhat combo territory, it can buy you some turns. But once Edgar gets enough critical mass onto the board, it's not going to matter. He'll have 20, 30, 50 damage.
Exactly. We see Mullen thumbing a growth spiral to the front of his hand. Not sure if he hit that Aether Gust.
Don't think he did. He found something to play, but not the card he was looking for.
Right.
And it feels like Edgar might turn the corner here. Which is really crazy to say facing down a 5-6 and an 8-8, but I do think it's the case.
Oh, right.
And Edgar, is he going to go straight for the Corvold? Tapping 5, I think that might be it. It's a pretty good read, and that is the play by Edgar.
Oh, my.
All right, he is really putting Collins to the test, asking him to show an Aether Gust, and it's not there.
Well, Edgar has one thing to say to Mullen. Trigger.
Yeah. So, he can sack another permanent when it enters the battlefield. Anytime sacrifice permanent, it gets a 1/1 counter and draws a card. Edgar is going to do a lot of damage here. Certainly reload his hand.
Right, and at this point, he's kind of just looking for that double Mayhem Devil game state that we saw from Dilks before.
Right. I mean, he could draw enough cards that next turn he just gets to untap and do everything.
Right.
Gilded Goose going to make a mana here. Draw a card off Corvold. Every time Edgar sacrifices a permanent, he gets a card. And Gilded Goose sacrificed for a card. And now Edgar spends that last mana on Mayhem Devil. Still has a food in play for that Cauldron Familiar in the graveyard.
And the attractive thing about this Corvold, you see that 8/8 Hydrate Crisis?
Sure.
That's an 8/8 Corvold. You just sacrifice anything. You sacrifice the food to bring back this cat, and all of a sudden it's a 9/9,
It can
and it
block.
outsizes it.
Yeah. Right. The food grows it to an 8/8. The cat grows it to a 9/9.
Exactly.
And Corvold flies, so it can just make the block.
Right. Collins, it's bad when you start thinking, is my Hydroid Crisis going to have to chump block for me to survive?
And again, we're reaching this spot. We saw this already in the Matthew Dilks Zach Allen matchup where the Simic Ramp deck just... It goes big with single cards, but it's not an engine, so it does lose pace here.
Correct. These cards are not necessarily going to scale as well together as a synergy deck like the Jund Sacrifice deck is. Right, there's a point where 12 permanents from Simic Ramp might feel like the resources of 15 permanents, but 12 permanents from Jund Sacrifice is going to feel like 20 permanents worth of things to do. Collins just adding his mana up. We see a Nissa at the front of his hand here.
Yeah, draw here from Collins. But right, with it just feels like this Corvold has already happened. I mean, at Collins, I'm looking at his whether he has something like mass manipulation to steal the entire field. Even that, I don't think is enough.
Right, and Witch's Oven makes it so Collins might not even get the important piece of the battlefield.
Yeah, and actually looks like Collins is on the same version of the deck as Dylan Donegan.
Team deck and all that.
The team deck. They are not the version, the Zach Allen version, the mass manipulation version. They are the more traditional build.
And in a lot of ways, Corvold feels like an analog to Hydroid Crisis. In these Jund Sacrifice decks, you have this big mana play that just kind of puts the game out of reach, and even if you answer the Crisis or the Corvold, the work's already kind of done as soon as it hits the battlefield.
One of the other big scaling options for Simic Ramp is Nissa, who shakes the world. But I think Edgar knows that if he untaps with this Corvold, none of this is going to matter.
Lights out.
And it looks like that's going to be the case. Collins doing his best to set up for a win on the following turn. But we're going to get to see what this Jund deck is capable of. Can it get all the way down from 19 in one turn? I think it's possible.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, right. We're going to see Edgar untap, drop out all the Mayhem Devils he's found. And that all the Ovens and Mayhem Devils are the big pieces. Each one will add just more damage.
Right, and there's a point where, again, all of these pieces end up being worth so much more than the sum of their parts.
So Collins, Nissa, then Risen Reef. He is setting up as much resource as he can muster.
All he can do at this point is dig, 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 dig. And
yeah, this is what his deck
somehow
does.
survives. We've entered that state where you think you're probably dead, but maybe you're not, so you got to play to that out. And we see Collins just kind of trying to do as much development in this turn as he can.
And now the Bard Collins doesn't like he has to say go. Let's see Edgar. End step, sacrifices a food.
Oh, this is in response to Leafkin Druid, so it can kill the Risen Reef and turn off Collins' card draw.
So Edgar does that. Does he get the Corvold as well? Looks like he may have missed that one. There are a lot. Okay, so he did get the card off Corvold. Correct in there, yeah. Corvold goes to 8/8. And maybe is that part of this, why we're seeing him go after creatures, is because Corvold grows here. It's, you know, all he really has to do is find something like a Murderous Rider at some point in this combo, blow up the Crisis, and then I guess he need to get the Crisis and the 5/6,
right,
and then could attack with a 20-power Corvold.
Exactly. You just need to get a couple of creatures out of the way at this point, and the game ends on the spot.
It doesn't have to be Mayhem Devil triggers upstairs.
Exactly. And we see him even leaving this cat in the graveyard on instep, because if he just has another Mayhem Devil, he all of a sudden has upwards of 40 damage.
Yeah, it's more damage to make that sacrifice on main phase.
Exactly. So if you're not planning on attacking with the cat on your following turn, then leaving it in the graveyard is frequently a more valuable resource.
We see one Murderous Rider in Edgar's hand. 2 Murderous Riders, and he can clear away both blockers. A Mayhem Devil and 1 Murderous Rider, he might be able to shoot down the 5/6 and then Rider away the 8/8 and still have enough.
It seems doable. So each oven is 2 sacrifices. There's 1 sacrifice on the battlefield.
Right.
Corvold sacrifices a permanent when it attacks.
So let's see. 3 mana. It is going to be the Murderous Rider on Hydroid Crisis. Starts there. 1 blocker out of the way. The 5/6 has reach. That's the other blocker. Edgar shocks a land into play. Second Murderous Rider. Oh. That's what we were looking for. Both blockers are gone. Corvold is now where our eyes go. It is currently a 9/9.
Ooh, this should do it.
Let's add it up. Sacrifices the food, gets back the familiar. So a damage upstairs, Colin to 16, a counter on Corvold, a card draw, a drain, Colin to 15. The Corvold is a 10/10. Sacrifice, Corvold goes to 11. Shoots upstairs, Collins goes to 14. And this should do it. Food means Collins goes to 13, Corvold goes to 12, Collins goes to 12 off the familiar, and that should be a lethal attacker now in Corvold the Fey Cursed King.
Oh yeah, at this point it really is just everyone going through the motions. Edgar has sealed up his line to the next stage of this bracket.
Right, and we saw this. Could Edgar deal 19 was the question. The answer appears to be yes. 1 more damage upstairs just to get some insurance on here. Collins to 11. Corvold to 13. And that attacker should do it. A drain again to 9. Maybe Edgar doesn't even need the attack. A swing in the air with Corvold. And that's going to do it. Edgar Magalhaes coming back here despite that turn 3 where it looked like he was going too slow. Jund sacrifice. This just looks like the matchup